everybody. Welcome to our latest 2022 Virtual Water Ambassador webinar. And we'll get going in just a second. Let me see if you guys could see that. And today we have a great guest speaker today, Kerry Scolardi, who's filling in for Beth Brady to talk about manatee mortalities in the Indian River Lagoon. And our next, this is showing, I guess, a few of our past webinars, but our next webinar is July 15th by Professor Nazrin Alandari, and she is with Florida State University and Florida A&M University, and she's going to talk about stormwater. And so those are our next. That's our next webinar, and we've got webinars all the way from we got two more, I think 2 or 3 more, August and September. I think we have 2 in September and 1 in August.
Yeah, and I will put the topics and registration links in the chat box for everyone.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. So just like all of our other webinars, please keep your stay muted. We usually mute everybody once they log in. And to kind of help with bandwidth, we do recommend that you keep your video off as well. And that kind of helps with the streaming of the webinar presentation. And you can go, if you can see my mouse there, you can go to this control here to change your screen controls. You could change the volume as well. I think that's in, actually, what am I doing? I think these are all here. There we go. Your microphone is muted. If you're connected to audio and can't hear, you can adjust your settings with that little caret symbol right there. And again, please keep your video off during the presentation. And you can click on your screen to see who's here. And also, we do ask, you can ask questions anytime. Please enter them into the chat. We will address the questions after our speaker's presentation concludes. And you can always leave when you need to by clicking that leave meeting button as well. But we don't want you to leave. So anyway, we'll have time for questions after the presentation, but feel free to ask anytime during the presentation. We are also recording this, and as we get these online, we will place them on our website. That is the web page that they are. It's our Martin County Extension website. And so we have a page with all of our past Water Ambassador recordings. And as I mentioned before, please use the chat to ask questions anytime, and we will address them at the end. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, Kerry Scolardi from Mote Marine Laboratory. She's been with Mote Marine Laboratory for quite some time, since 1999, when she first worked in the Marine Mammal Stranding and Waterway Management Program. So she's been really involved with not only manatee research, but manatee rescues as well. And she started at Mote Marine in 1999, got her master's degree at the University of South Florida, and then came back, I guess, to, she's been all over the place, doing some work in Antarctica, research cruises all along the Southern Ocean. And she returned to Mote Marine Laboratory in 2004, joining the Manatee Research Program. So she's been very engaged in numerous research projects involving aerial and boat-based surveys. That's actually her in the gray in that photo, taking a picture of a manatee swimming next to the boat. That's a really nice photo, by the way. So she's worked in over, all of her work has resulted in about over 500 hours of marine mammal aerial survey experience using and photo identification. And she is currently, Kerry is currently the Aerial Survey Coordinator and GIS Database Manager for the Manatee Research Program. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kerry, and I will stop sharing my screen so that she can share her screen and start her presentation. Great. And
Thank you so much for having me. For those of you who are expecting Beth, Dr. Beth Brady, she was hoping to do this talk today, but had the opportunity to collect some much needed data for a project she's been working on. So she asked me to fill in and talk to you about manatee mortality in the Indian River Lagoon. So let me go ahead and start sharing. Are you able to see the screen?
yep, looks great.
Okay,
Over
great.
here.
Okay. Let me see if I can get it to advance now. There we go. So forgive me for starting with sort of the basics, but I thought it would be important to touch on some of the aspects of manatee biology and ecology to give some context in reference to the UME as to why manatees are in the position they're in. So manatees are fully aquatic mammals that fall under the order Sirenia. The etymology of the name Sirenia dates back to the sirens of Greek mythology, whose lusty appearance and alluring songs purportedly drew sailors and their ships to wreck on rocky shorelines. There are 4 extant or living species of Sirenia. The West Indian manatee is the species we'll be talking about today. It has 2 subspecies, the Florida manatee and the Antillean manatee. And so I think we're familiar with the range of the Florida manatee that's here in red. The Antillean manatee distribution, it's not continuous, but it generally occupies the waters along the South and Central American coastlines and the Caribbean. We have the Amazon manatee, which may overlap with the Antillean manatee subspecies. The Amazonian manatee is confined to freshwater habitats throughout the drainage of the Amazon River and its tributaries. The African manatee is found in coastal and riverine waters off West and Central Africa. And then we have dugongs, and they're found in the Indo-Pacific region along the coast of Africa, the Red Sea, and across most of coastal Asia through the Philippines and Australia. They're different from manatees where they have the split flukes. Okay, so our focus today is on Florida manatee. On average, they're 9 to 10 feet long and are about 1,000 pounds, but can weigh up to about 3,000 pounds. Calves are about 4 to 5 foot long and 60 pounds at birth. And there is some sexual dimorphism where the females are slightly larger than the males. And like us, manatees are a long-lived species with a life expectancy upwards of 40 to 60 years. Captive animals have been known to live nearly 70 years or more. However, it's thought that the life expectancy of wild manatees is at the lower end of that range, or maybe even lower than 40. Manatees subsist on plant material that is relatively low in nutritive value and a high proportion of water content. And so as a result, they spend many hours a day consuming large quantities of vegetation to satisfy their metabolic needs. But they do exploit a large array of marine and freshwater plant species, both endemic and exotic. It includes vegetation that's submerged or floating or even along the shoreline. They're remarkably optimistic in their diets, particularly when they're in waterways with little vegetation or when it's in low quality. We've observed manatees feeding on algae that's growing on jetties and pilings. They're feeding on mangrove props and leaves. And in a few reported cases, they've been observed feeding on fish carcasses. Manatees have a leisurely lifestyle, likely due to the lack of a true predator and until recently abundant forage. So they will rest a large proportion of the day. I have 2 to 12 hours on my slide. That large range is due to the fact that the amount of time they spend resting changes seasonally. They do prefer prefer calm, quiet areas like we do. And they tend to rest at the bottom or the surface, but they can be neutrally buoyant and rest anywhere within the water column. Internally, they have very dense bones that act as a ballast, and then the large lungs facilitate that buoyancy control. Manatees are highly social. They communicate by sound, sight, taste, and touch. And so they're very tactile. Oftentimes we see them interacting in ways that appear affectionate, such as nudging, bumping, rolling, kissing, particularly juveniles. They're very curious. But they do have what we call a fission-fusion society, where individuals come together in a series of temporary associations. So they don't really form families. Over the course of a day, a manatee will spend time alternating between being with other individuals or being alone. And really the only long-term association with manatees is between a mother and calf. Okay, reproduction. Females generally don't reproduce until about 5 to 7 years of age, because as young females, they lack the skills necessary to successfully birth and raise calves. Males are sexually mature between 2 to 6 years. There really isn't a specific mating season like other animals, although we do tend to see more of it in non-winter months, and that's likely because in winter they're more occupied with staying warm, which we'll talk about in a minute. When they mate, they form these mating herds, which is the image on the bottom left, where you'll have anywhere from 1 to 20 or so males that will be following a focal female. She'll be in the lead, and they'll all be jockeying around, positioning to try and mate with her. They'll follow her every move for days to weeks. There's a lot of splashing and thrashing, but there's really no aggression. And we often see these mating herds along the beach in the summertime. And usually the female is just trying to get some rest. And so she will head into shallow water to kind of keep the males away from her ventrum and take a rest. Once they have mated, gestation is roughly about a year. And once the calf is born, it will be dependent on its mother for up to 2 years. And the interval between births is typically 2 to 5 years. Manatees are habitat generalists. They utilize canal systems, mangrove creeks, salt marshes, estuaries, bays, and nearshore coastal waters. Their habitat distribution is highly seasonal though. During winter months, they need to seek out and utilize warm water sites. And this is because they have minimal fat protection from cold water and they lack a true blubber layer. Additionally, as a consequence of feeding on relatively low energy or nutritive value food resources, they have an unusually low metabolic rate. The combination of the two result in a high rate of heat loss. And so when manatees are exposed to water temperatures below what we call their thermal tolerance, which is around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, they will actually, once it gets down to about 65, then they become susceptible to suffer from cold stress. To further complicate matters, during prolonged periods of cold, manatees will forego feeding trips and remain at warm water sites for days to up to a week. And this further depletes their energy stores and insulations and lessens the amount of heat that is provided by gut fermentation. And the image on the left is of the aggregation at Crystal River. And on the right, you see a small calf. This is at a Florida Power and Light plant in Fort Myers, and the small calf is suffering from cold stress and emaciation. So manatees rely on a network of warm water sites. They, on the East Coast especially, they will travel between these sites throughout the winter, whereas on the West Coast, they tend to be more They tend to like to stay in one place. They will use a primary site when it's very cold, and then they'll travel to some secondary sites, the in-between cold periods. This map on the left shows the main warm water sites for manatees, including natural springs, such as Blue Spring, which is associated with the St. John's area. And then we have warm mineral springs down in the southwest, and Crystal River and Homosassa along the central west. And then there are on the east coast and west coast, 10 major thermal refuge from power plants. There are 3 on the west coast and 7 on the east coast. The problem is currently 2/3 of the manatee population now rely on the power plant outfalls to survive the coldest winter days. But these plants have finite lifetimes, and so manatee dependence on them is creating a long-term dilemma for managers. And I'm just going to point out here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the focus today will be around the Indian River Lagoon region, will be this Cape Canaveral power plants and FPL power plant. So how many manatees are there? They've been estimated through standardized statewide aerial surveys that we call synoptic aerial surveys. And these surveys have shown that the number of manatees counted has increased from about 1,000 in the early 1990s to the last one done was 6,500. However, there have been other types of surveys conducted that allow for more rigorous statistical analysis that have given estimates up to 8,500. We haven't conducted a synoptic since 2019. So that last number is 6,500. So in 2017, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a rule to reclassify manatees from endangered to threatened under the Endangered Species Act. This rule was largely based on 2 parameters, the first one being the population size and their status. And as I just talked about, counts of manatees in both the US and Puerto Rico seem to have increased. And so population estimates have also increased. They also relied on a core biological model that indicated there was a low likelihood that Florida subspecies would be reduced to fewer than 4,000 individuals in the next 100 years. The second area they looked at was threats, or considered was threats. And they concluded that threats were being addressed and reduced throughout the species range. So this has caused some concern for scientists and advocates. Some things that have been pointing out about what was used to determine this downlisting was that the core biological model included some outdated data. The databases they used include mark recapture data, genetics data. And so some felt that some of those databases needed to be updated. And so it wasn't really the best data to use. And also, and this has become more abundantly clear, is the assumption that the threats have been stabilized or will remain constant. So let's look at threats briefly. The characteristics and traits that we've talked about so far for manatees, they're long-lived, slow-breeding, aquatic herbivores with a low metabolic rate, and they occupy near shore waters. This has led them to certain vulnerabilities and makes them more sensitive to mortality, particularly adults. Manatee mortality has been collected and published by FWC over the last 45 years. The pie chart on the slide represents mortality data from 1999 to 2019. And the 20-year averages for each category are displayed on each pie slice. Between collisions in watercraft, crushing and drowning in floodgates, canal locks, and other sources of human related mortality, such as entanglement in lines, ingesting of fishing gear, human-related causes typically account for 1/4 of manatee mortality. The next largest category is perinatal deaths, and that represents calves not determined to have died from any human-related causes. Natural related causes is the third largest, representing 17%, and it's deaths due to red tide poisoning, but also infectious or non-infectious disease. Cold stress is the fourth largest category and accounts for roughly 11% of all manatee deaths. And then we have the undetermined category. And these are where manatee deaths, where the carcass was in good condition, but necropsy findings were inconclusive. If we look at like a 10-year span of mortality, we see that the different categories are not consistent. They do tend to pulse. And so other than watercraft is fairly constant over this 10-year period, but categories such as cold stress and red tide deaths can really vary from year to year. You see here, we have cold stress in blue. There were two unusually cold winter seasons in 2010 and 2011 that resulted in record number of deaths. There were 282 in 2010 and 114 in 2011. And then in 2013, we have the unusual mortality event in Indian River Lagoon, where 286 total died. Not just Indian River Lagoon. That 286 also includes a red tide event in the southwest region of Florida. And of course, we're going to talk more about the UMEs. So UME is an unusual mortality event, and it's defined under the Marine Mammal Protection Act as a stranding event that is unexpected, involves a significant die-off of any marine mammal population, and demands an immediate response. These are declared by a marine mammal working group under NOAA, and this group is comprised of experts from scientific and academic institutions that have a wide variety of experience in biology, toxicology, pathology, ecology, and epidemiology. Okay, let's hone our focus in on the Indian River Lagoon. There have been two UMEs in the last 10 years or so in the Indian River Lagoon. In 2013, an unusual mortality event was declared after there was a marked increase in manatee deaths of an unknown cause. This UME was followed by a dramatic reduction in seagrass coverage in the IRL due to chronic non-toxic phytoplankton blooms, which resulted in an ecosystem shift to macroalgae species dominance. At least 199 manatee deaths fitting the UME case definition were documented in and adjacent to the IRL, but mortality was highest in 2013 when 111 of those deaths were documented. Our most recent and still currently active UME was declared in December of 2021. Between December 1st and August 31st, there were 700 manatee deaths documented. For this year and for this past winter season, there have been 455 manatee deaths documented. In both years, so on the graph on the right is a preliminary graph provided by Martine DeWitt during a presentation to the Manatee Forum. And I just provided this graph so you could see that in both years, the number of carcasses recovered decreased in late spring as manatees no longer were experiencing stress of cold and had moved out of the IRL to where they were finding better forage. I know most of you are probably very familiar with the Indian River Lagoon, but I included this slide just in case. The full length of the lagoon covers a third of Florida's east coast and is comprised of three water bodies: the Mosquito Lagoon to the north, Banana River to the east, and the Indian River Lagoon Indian River to the west and south. The Brevard County accounts for 71% of the lagoon surface. The geographic location and and high habitat diversity of the IRL supports a wide range of species, which qualifies the lagoon as an estuary of national significance. It provides habitat for over 5,000 species of plants and animals, 75 of which have been identified as in need of protection, including the Florida manatee. In fact, nearly a third of the state's estimated manatee population occupies the water of the IRL at certain times of year. Brevard County in particular attracts large aggregations of manatees, mostly because it has the industrial source of warm water at Titusville. However, the IRL is shallow and has 5 inlets, which means it's poorly flushed, and it receives little inflow of fresh water from the watershed, with the exception of those pulses or from the St. Lucie River, but it's very localized flushing. Human population growth and resulting change in land use, such as the conversion of wetlands for agriculture and the hardening of shorelines for urban development, have increased the flow of nutrients and sediment into the lagoon. This nutrient loading has had devastating impacts on the health of the lagoon, which we all know. It has resulted in large scale and reoccurring phytoplankton blooms. And these blooms effectively reduce light penetration through the water column, which stresses the seagrasses and leads to their deaths. The image on the left is taken from a Schaefer 2019 paper showing the common harmful algal blooms or HABs. The northern portion of the Indian River Lagoon has been affected by several large blooms in the last decade by different species of algae, such as a pyridinium species. And this one is well known because it produces a toxin that can cause seafood toxicity and paralytic shellfish poisoning. Blooms of this species have been a yearly occurrence, typically June through October in the northern IRL since the 90s, but blooms have increased in cell abundance and concentration over the years. In 2012, the first occurrence of a brown tide affected large portions of northern Indian River Lagoon. This has persisted since 2012, with the severity of its blooms varying each year. In the central region, the green portion, there was in 2011 a super bloom of phytoplankton that consisted of small green algae and cyanobacteria. This achieved extraordinary biomass and spatial extent and lasted up to 8 months. These sporadic blooms of cyanobacteria and picoplankton assemblages continue to occur in the IRL, with smaller events occurring between 2016 and 2018. And then in the southern IRL, we have the toxic freshwater cyanobacterium, which blooms yearly in warmer months in Lake Okeechobee. And when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers discharges these large volumes of water from the lake eastward through the C-44 canal into the southern IRL, this species then persists and grows in the lower salinity waters. In 2016, the bloom was so severe that Martin County declared a state of emergency. So let's have a look at the impact of these blooms on seagrasses in the IRL. I'm fairly sure a number of you have seen this graph by now. What you can see after a slight increase in seagrass from 94 to 2009, we then saw with those blooms in 2011, a significant decline that continued through 2019. Overall, this represents a reduction of 58% of the seagrasses, or 19,000 hectares. And even worse, the standardized mean percent cover decreased to just 4%. So what are manatees eating? As I touched briefly on for the 2013 unusual mortality event, there was a shift to a macroalgae dominance. And so carcasses were turning up. They appeared to be in good nutritional condition, but the necropsy results indicated that they had suffered from multi-organ congestion or wet lungs that was consistent with drowning without any kind of trauma. The gastrointestinal compartments were filled with a diverse macroalgae species. You can see in this image on the upper right here. A multidisciplinary approach of environmental and carcass sampling found that no causative evidence through tests for micro and macroalgae biotoxins, trace chemicals, general toxins, or other Vitrium biochemistry. So it was very perplexing why these seemingly full manatees were turning up dead. So an 8-year-long investigation concluded that the cause of death was associated with a clostridial or bacterial infection. It was initiated by the sudden shift to a predominantly macroalgae diet, which caused a severe disruption to the gut microflora. For the current UME that began in 2020, manatees are eating very little, almost nothing. Many of the animals rescued and the carcasses recovered have been severely emaciated. External features of severe emaciation you can see in the photo on the bottom right, and include loose skin folds, folds in the belly, a visible outline of skeletal structures, a flattening of the body, which we call pancaking, and a distinction of the head from the rest of the body that we call peanut head. And that's obvious in this next slide here in the image on the left. On necropsy, it was found that the transformation of fat and muscle and connective tissue were transformed into a watery gelatinous substance, suggesting that manatees in this UME event experienced prolonged starvation and malnutrition. The state of extreme wasting is further evidenced by the atrophy of vital organs such as the liver, heart, and diaphragm, which is noticeable upon microscopic examination. So this slide here was taken from FWC's UME website. The slide on the left, which I already talked about, shows the peanut head. So it's another physical feature of emaciation. The middle section shows fat and muscle tissue from 2 different emaciated manatees. The one on the left, that manatee died from cold stress disease, but still had grossly normal fat despite it being thin and depleted. Whereas the manatee on the right died from starvation, and you can see that the fat and muscle was depleted, but also fairly watery. And the microscopic view on the right is of the liver, and it shows liver cells, which are the pink and purple with the pink and purple nucleus, are smaller than normal, and the brown pigment in the cells shows the breakdown of the components that make up those cells. So Beth wanted me to show you just a portion of this clip. The PBS came out to show what was being done, how we were responding to this event. So I'm going to play just a few minutes of it.
It's a desperate measure for a desperate time. Florida manatees, freezing and famished, getting a handout from humans at a power plant near Titusville. These gentle giants, also called sea cows, gravitated to the warm water discharges from power plants and natural springs every winter. But on the East Coast this year, like last, they're arriving hungry and weak. The seagrass they subsist on has all but disappeared. Ron Meskey with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
We're here for a purpose now that we're helping animals.
Last year, about 1,100 of them died, mostly due to starvation, compounded by 100 causes.
Carrie, we've
Nearby,
lost the audio a little bit. It's getting choppy.
The species that he has spent more than 45 years trying to protect. He's executive director of the state
First time ever. Supplemental picture. Started off okay, but it's a long one. Really,
The drone documents crises in Vietnam. What are you looking for?
Well, we're looking at not only how many manatees are here, but actually what body condition they're in. How many leaning on their way towards starvation, and then looking for those that would be very sick, that would be having trouble balancing in the water, sideways swimming, those kinds of things that tell us that they trouble and need help.
In intensive care facilities like this one at Tampa.
Roughly, I've seen them do about 10. Everybody's stable after our last few days where they were, it's a little hectic, so.
Molly Lippincott is the curator of Florida and Manatees. Wonderful. Pushing feet. And every 4 hours around 7 months, one of them, Flapjack, who got his name because he was so emaciated, had the flag here on October 20th. But now he's doing much better.
Work very hard. We always figure the animals come first in a lot of situations. Life may take a little bit. Do what's best for these animals.
Okay. I really liked that. Oh, sorry. Let's see if we can move on here. I really like the footage because it gave some great footage of the animals at the power plant, and then also of the response, some of the many ways that they're trying to respond. So what are we doing about this manatee UME? The Fish and Wildlife Service and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, in addition to a number of educational, research, and manatee care organizations, have been collaborating on the response to the mortality event. Although I will say FWC and the rehab organizations have really done the lion's share of the work. Response priorities have focused on manatee rescue and rehabilitation, carcass recovery and necropsy, population monitoring and public outreach. And also there, I'm sure everybody's heard about the feeding station that they have established. So it's technically called a temporary field response station. It's located at the Cape Canaveral or Titusville, Florida Power and Light plant. I have this image on the right here. So manatees typically would aggregate at the discharge on the left, but when the plant is not running, if there's a turbine down or they're down a few little parts, they will turn on a manatee temporary heating system, and that is located in this little rectangular area right here. And so that is where they set up the supplemental feeding program for manatees. And when they started, they tried putting the lettuce in this temporary area, but the heat was not on there. The heat was still on at the discharge. And so then they started to try to feed the animals at the discharge, but I think I don't know the specifics. I just know from what I could see from the air, but it didn't seem that the animals were taking to it. And then maybe by a stroke of luck, the power plant needed to shut down. The main discharge needed to shut down for some maintenance work. And so they began running the temporary heating system on the right here. And so then manatees were drawn to that and began feeding once they established the feeding site there. So other activities that have taken place there include, well, actually, let me point out the other things I have in here. Sorry. There were approximately 20,000 pounds of romaine and butterleaf lettuce offered weekly, and that was supplied by Florida growers. Since feeding began in January of 2022, over 200,000 pounds of mixed produce was provided. Most of it which was paid for by public donations to the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. So staff at the feeding site, in addition to looking for sick or emaciated animals, were also monitoring the water quality to identify any potential changes from the excessive nutrients or chlorophyll. They really did their best to try and collect any scraps of lettuce that was left behind. And as you could see from the last slide, it was a fairly contained area. They also conducted daily counts of manatees at the site, where the highest one count they received was in late January, and that was 800 animals. There was also drone surveys conducted to help detect manatees that might need rescuing based on visualization of their body condition. And this also aided the provisioning program by monitoring the feeding sites, which I talked about earlier, where they could tell they were manatees were not in the areas where they were putting the lettuce at first until the heat was on. And so they used the drone to kind of monitor the manatee response. A secondary auxiliary use of these UAV surveys, which is what Dr. Beth Brady was working on, was the development of a standardized technique to document body condition parameters through the application of photogrammetry. She hopes to use those standards to detect and monitor individuals or groups of animals that are trending towards starvation based on their body parameters, and then formulate proper surveillance and response of critically ill animals over the extent of a winter season. There was funding for expanded telemetry or tagging studies to monitor the health and behavior of the manatees' response to the change in their habitat. And aerial surveys were implemented with the goal to provide a means of observing the distribution and abundance in the IRL in response to the die-off. And that is the aspect of monitoring that I was most involved in. And so I'm going to expand on that a little further because it's what I know the most about, but I'll try to be brief. So aerial surveys document changes in distribution and abundance of manatees. They've been used as a tool to assess aspects of surrounding biology for over 5 decades. And they can address a few questions such as where are the animals? How many are there? Does the distribution or number of animals in that study area change over time or response to specific factors? And are these trends similar or different in other areas? Most of our surveys are conducted in small 4-seat high-winged airplanes, such as Cessna 172 or 82, and we fly at a height of 800 feet and a speed of 80 knots. There are generally 3 types of surveys, and which one you fly depends on what type of information you desire. Index and transect surveys, the one on the left and the one on the middle, that shows a flight track from each one of those surveys. They're efficient and they're economical, and they will allow for a more rigorous statistical analysis. But they aren't always the best method for trying to collect more detailed information. We used distributive surveys for these recent Indian River Lagoon surveys. Distribution surveys can cover a large area in a short amount of time. They're used to assess the distribution and habitat use, and they can measure changes over time. Several distribution surveys are typically flown over a given time period, so that data can be compared over months or years, or in some cases, decades. They don't generally provide suitable, rigorous estimate of population sizes or trends, but there are newer methods making this possible. Fortunately, in 2010, the Florida Power and Light Company modernized its Titusville plant to the Cape Canaveral Energy Center. And this repowering made it a more efficient power plant. But as a result, the plant had to be down for a few years. And as a result of that, they were required, in order to certify the project, they were required by FWC to implement a biological monitoring plan. And the primary purpose of that plan was to ensure, first, that the thermal regulatory needs of manatees were being met, However, this research also provided improved insights for scientists and managers as to how manatee populations responded to a change in habitat. The monitoring took on a secondary role when in 2010, after the first winter season of the study, the severe habitat degradation occurred in the Indian River Lagoon, leading to a 40% reduction in seagrass between 2009 and 2011, where in the Banana River alone, there was an 87% loss of seagrass. That's the image shown on the left. The solid green was the seagrass extent as of 2009, and then the hatched area, excuse me, the hatched area shows where a lot of the losses were, or where the extent was after 2011. On the right, I like this figure because it shows what happened with our manatee distribution. Through aerial monitoring, we showed that as a result of the loss in the Banana River, that manatees moved away from foraging areas in that region, and they moved towards the northwest portion, and they were in actually the eastern part of the Indian River across from the power plant. Large numbers were using this area to forage. And I point this out because a number of years later, after a number of phytoplankton blooms again killed off more seagrass, a lot of these major feeding grounds were gone by 2020. And I tried to tweak these photos a lot so that you could see where the loss is just so extensive. The darker areas along this portion here are indicative of seagrass, and here you just see shoals. So when we're flying, we're just seeing just shoals of sand. So the shift after 2020 appears to be manatees are feeding in the Mosquito Lagoon rather heavily, but we aren't sure exactly if they're getting all the nutrition they need, because there is still, Mosquito Lagoon has not recovered. You can see these are images from the air of manatees. That's a sign of feeding when you see plumes of sediment behind them. And you can see the little trails that they're making as they're trying to feed, but there's just not extensive amount of seagrass for them to feed on. But we are seeing large numbers of animals in this lagoon. We're also seeing them use some seagrass beds in the southern parts of the Indian River Lagoon as well. All right, I'm going to skip through these because I think I'm running a little bit behind. So back to what's being done to help manatees during the UME. Like I said before, there's a strong focus on rescue and carcass recovery. There were 159 manatees rescued in 2021, and in 2022 so far, there have been 71 rescues, or at least the last time I looked. There are currently 89 manatees in captivity across 14 different facilities, but space is still a big issue. And so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and FWC are working with the manatee rescue and rehabilitation partners to expedite permitting, emergency authorizations, and bring new partners on with critical care space. And they're also exploring contingency sites, such as the Walaka National Fish Hatchery. There are some long-term projects in the works, or some, I'm sorry, these are short-term projects that hopefully will have a long-term impact in helping manatees. And I believe there's a talk in a few weeks about these restoration projects. So I'm just going to briefly touch on them. Florida Senate bill provided $8 million in revenue for FWC to conduct projects where they can restore manatee access to springs, but also for habitat restoration in highly concentrated areas. There's currently 7 priority projects that involve shoreline restoration, sediment reduction, installation of oyster, clam, and seagrass habitats, and the inclusion of a seagrass nursery network with 3 locations that would increase the capacity for seagrass aquaculture while conditions in the IRL improve. Those are starting in 2022 and will take 3 to 5 years to complete. There are also other entities, including Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program, Brevard County, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, St. John's Water Management District, that are working on additional aquatic habitat restoration efforts. Habitat restoration, though, is contingent on water quality. And so there are many issues that manatees on the horizon will face. The current human population of Florida is 21 or more million, and with an expected 2035 population to reach 24 million. Our waterways are a major source of recreation and revenue. Increasing boat traffic and coastal development resulting from Florida's growth will accelerate human-related manatee mortality. We are still rapidly altering coastal habitat and impacting water quality, introducing pesticides, toxins, pollution into our waterways. Additionally, boating registrations have reached over 1 million, which, other than the direct threat manatees face from impacts, there's a secondary impact when these boat propellers drive across the seagrass beds, causing scarring, which take years, possibly decades, to grow back. There is a push to reclassify the manatee to endangered. This past July, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service initiated a comprehensive 5-year status review for the West Indian manatee for both subspecies. They anticipate completing that status review by the fall of 2022. And if the science supports a change, they'll consider a rulemaking process to pursue that change within the content of the existing workload and staff availability. So I think a lot will depend on what happens this coming winter. So what can the public do to help? We have noticed with all of the press coverage on the state feeding manatees that people in various areas themselves have been throwing lettuce into the water thinking they were helping, but this is not helpful, as we know, because it alters their natural behavior and instincts. And it's the state has been trying to do it in a very regulated, well thought out way so that it limits human involvement. So we want the public to avoid feeding manatees or watering manatees or petting the animals. And that is the end of the presentation, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you so much, Kerry. That was a fantastic talk. We're going to allow people time to put your questions into the chat. And while you're typing those up, I'm going to put a poll up for you all to complete. We did have, while we're waiting, we did have a comment from William Klein who says that he has SECI visibility data from 2018 until now, and noticed that the worst visibility was during a period during the Titusville sewer spill, and that there is data available if you would like it.
I would most definitely like that data. I'm currently working on finishing a manuscript from our 2010 to 2015 Brevard County surveys that was part of the biological monitoring when the power plant was being repowered in Titusville. And one of the things we were trying to show was also how manatee distribution might have been changed through, not necessarily from habitat, but also if the water visibility wasn't impacting our ability to count them. So that would be really helpful.
And Nathan has a question. It says it was briefly mentioned on the solutions slide, but if water quality and HABs were to improve in the IRL, is seagrass replanting a possibility?
Yes, that's definitely one of the things that they are working on. As I briefly went over, they're actually supporting funding. Part of that funding that the state provided or the federal government provided was for some seagrass hatcheries. I don't know if you call them hatcheries, but seagrass growing facilities.
And Nathan,
so I think the goal is why they wait. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say that is the topic of our September 13th presentation. So we're going to have FWC staff talk about those seagrass restoration and replanting projects. So sorry to interrupt.
And they're a much
Kerry.
more knowledgeable resource for that.
Kerry, William asked for your email.
Sure. That's it
Do
right
you
there. I see it
mind?
in the chat.
Yeah, do you mind if I put your email? I can in the chat.
I went ahead and did it.
Absolutely.
Is
Okay,
that-
perfect. And then I'm guessing that's the Corps of Engineers mandated to perform mitigation and restoration after their algal releases from Lake O.
That I'm not sure. I'm sure it's part of it, but I'm not sure. There's a number of organizations that are going to be working on that, on the habitat restoration, federal, state, and local.
There's a few that might even be signed on to here. So I know Rosemary from Florida Oceanographic is here. So they're going to be one of those seagrass nursery locations. Marine Discovery Center, I believe, in New Smyrna Beach. Harbor Branch Oceanographic is already one. I don't know if there's another one. I can't think of another one, but that's actually our September, as Lisa was saying, that's our September webinar as well. So it's a great segue.
Next question is, would more funding directed towards appropriate supplemental feeding be helpful?
I think someone from FWC would be better positioned to answer that question. I have heard that they plan to do it again. They're thinking about doing it again. So I'm going to assume that yes, they're going to need more funding.
And Jim asks, is there any review of lagoon shoaling to its health?
I'm not sure what that question is. The lagoon shoaling. Is there a review of lagoon shoaling? I don't know, maybe if you could specify.
Jim, if you can clarify your question or even unmute yourself and ask the question if you're able, if you have audio. Okay, well, in the meantime, of the loss of water volume.
I'm not sure. Does he mean like the loss, the stopping or reducing the inflows from the lagoon, from Lake Okeechobee? Or, well, I know that I know that Indian River Lagoon has a high salinity value, but I think it's been like that for a long time. So I don't think I'm a good person to answer that question.
And I think it's important to note, and you showed this on your map, that the areas of the northern portion of the lagoon that are most influenced by seagrass loss are not influenced by the Lake Okeechobee discharges. They're different areas of the lagoon.
Correct. Right. It's not just one, it's been what's the word I'm looking for? Just a perfect storm of events that have come together to cause these issues, anywhere from the habitat degradation or the wetlands, and the building of the canals and the septic tanks and the lack of flushing. So it's a variety of issues that are going to need to be addressed.
Yeah, and William adds one more issue to the pot. He says, I have been studying information about stormwater ponds that empty directly into the IRL. There are no requirements to monitor the water quality or maintain the water quality at acceptable levels. This is a major pollution source that is not being corrected. So just another comment. And we are approaching 1 o'clock, so we'll leave a little bit of time for the last questions. But in the meantime, Kerry, I want to thank you so much for an amazing presentation and for filling in last minute.
Sure,
we know that's always stressful, but we do really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us for the Water Ambassador Program, and we will hopefully get the link up by the end of the week. Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. That was awesome.
Thank you.
We got a couple more new messages here. Okay, great.
Yeah, you have lots of thank yous in the chat. Okay.
I appreciate it.